Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Budget Committee meeting of March 3rd. This morning for today, we will be talking about Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency. I would like to call this meeting to order and, as usual, go through the list of councillors and do an AV check just to make sure that everybody is online. So let's start with Councillor Daigle-Gammon, District 1.
Everybody, fellow councillors, Mr. Chair, Mayor, lovely to be here representing District 1, Waverley, Fall River, Muscatobit Valley, and all the beautiful communities in between, and ready to talk about fire.
There we go. Thank you very much. Councillor Hensby, District 2.
Councillor District 2 here. Just want to let my IT people know that I have no video. All I can see is just everybody's initials and caricatures, but I have no video, so I assume I won't be able to see the budget presentation unless they want to send me another link to this meeting, please.
Does that mean we don't see him? Woohoo!
We don't see him, but yes, we will ask IT to get in touch with you. Thank you very much, Councillor Hensby. Councillor Kent, District 3. I don't see you in the meeting. Okay, Councillor Purdy, District 4.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Looking forward to our meeting today. Representing District 4, Cole Harbour, West Falls, Loon, and Cherrybrook. And okay, see ya.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Austin, District 5.
I'm here, Mr. Chair, ready to go.
Good stuff. Thank you. Councillor Mancini, District 6.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. This morning, colleagues, I'm thinking of our colleague and friend, Steve Adams, and the loss of his mom. So, Steve, our hearts are with you and our thoughts are with you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. That was unfortunate, and we do offer our condolences. Councillor Mason, District 7.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. All present and accounted for. I'm pleased to let everybody know that late last night I got my asymptomatic COVID test results back and I am negative. I encourage everybody to schedule a test today and go and get, as my daughter put it, your brain sampled. So
there you go.
It's not painful, it's only uncomfortable.
Did they find it?
Negative. Test result is negative, Tim. Confirming what you knew.
Super. Councillor Smith, District 8.
Here and accounted for, District 8, Halifax, to the north. As Councillor Mason said, it's uncomfortable, but it's worth it. So, go get the test if you can.
It absolutely is. And as they say, be positive and stay negative. Councillor Cleary, District 9.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Thanks, everyone who's watching, all four of you. Happy Wednesday from District 9, and Councillor Mason just confirmed his COVID test results is the same as his personality. Very negative.
Oh. Councillor Morris, District 10.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and colleagues. I don't think I'm going to get mixed up in this. I'm just delighted to be here from Clayton Park.
We're delighted to have you. Thank you very much. Councillor Cuddle, District 11.
Hello, I am here from District 11, Purcell's Cove. I just want to echo Tony's sentiments around the loss of Steve Adams' mother on Monday and extend my condolences as well. And I'm looking forward to today's presentation. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much. Councillor Stoddard, District 12.
Good morning, everyone. It's so bright and shiny out here. I had to close my blinds for a minute, but I'm saying hello from District 12. Beachville, Lakeside, Timberlake, Clayton Park West, and Wedgwood. Good morning, colleagues.
Good stuff. Good morning. And Councillor Lovelace, District 13.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Bienvenue. C'est moi de la francophonie. Félicitations, and looking forward to today's presentation.
Absolutely, and it certainly is Francophone Month now that it is March. Thank you very much, Councillor Lovelace. District 14, Councillor Blackburn.
Hello, good morning, everybody. And Tony, Patty, you read my mind. We're sending big hugs to our former colleague Steve Adams, and hopefully he knows that we're thinking of him in this sad time for him and his family.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Outfit, District 16.
Good morning from District 16. My IQ test came back negative. Does that count? I don't know, but anyway, good morning to everybody. A beautiful day, and look forward to hearing from the chief. I see him popping up there.
Absolutely. And Mayor Savage, good morning.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Look forward to today. This may be our last chance to promote something that Councillor Lovelace reminded me of last night, which is the International Women's Days events coming up, featuring some of our councillors, Councillors Tuttle, Daigle Gammon, and Councillor Lovelace, our newly almost gender parity council. I look forward to seeing those. So congratulations to you folks. And also, if I could, Mr. Chair, just want to, it kind of came as a bit of a surprise, but the small business real property tax rebate program that the province announced yesterday looks like it's going to be very targeted to businesses, to those they're going after, not just those who pay property tax, but also those who rent. So it looks, with more details to come, it looks like a really positive thing. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And that was a welcome announcement. So at this point, I'd like to move ahead with the approval of the minutes of February 10th, 2021. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes, please?
I so move.
Second.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stoddard to move, and I think that was Councillor Blackburn to second. Any errors or omissions in the minutes? Hearing none, call for the question on the approval of the minutes. All those in favor of the minutes of February 10th?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, thank you very much. Call for declaration of conflicts of interest. And hearing none. Next, we move on to the public participation section of the meeting. As a reminder to those watching from home, in order to have signed up as a speaker, the deadline was 4:30 p.m. on the business day prior to the hearing. We have one speaker signed up for today's meeting, and the registered speaker for today is Brendan Marr, and I'd like to hand it over to the clerk for a second.
Good morning, Brendan. Please make sure that your webcast or TV broadcast is muted and that you're listening using your phone. You can press *6 on your phone and you'll hear an announcement that you're no longer muted. You may then begin speaking. You have up to 5 minutes to speak. Once you finish your comments and answering any questions of clarification, please hang up the phone and then watch the rest of the meeting using your webcast.
Brendan, are you on the line? Brendan, are you with us this morning?
So Brendan, we can see you're in the meeting. So if you press *6 and then just wait, it'll click on. You just need to push it once and then give it a second.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Hi, Brendan. Yes, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, and thanks to members of council for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. I'm an old face to many of you, but new to quite a few of you now. Quickly to introduce myself, I'm the president of the Halifax Professional Firefighters. I'm a captain at the Bayers Road Fire Station, and I've been with Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency Services in my 24th year. I'm a hazardous materials technician. I've had over 4,600 emergencies that I've responded to, and I've worked in every one of our staff stations from Sheet Harbor to Black Point. I represent 490 members of the Halifax Professional Firefighters, and our membership is comprised of firefighters, fire prevention officers, fire inspectors, training officers, logistics personnel, and emergency vehicle technicians. We are an essential service. Our members have been here every day during the pandemic, which has been so challenging to so many of us. We are proud of the way that we've worked with Fire Chief Ken Stubing and the management team at HRFE, and we have advocated to be a key component of the service delivery in in keeping our community safe and livable. Some of the ways that we've innovated and worked with management during these challenging times through our constant partnership and communication and researching safe practices to continue our services and working together to message safe practice to our members and encourage a culture of safety that enables us to continue to work and go home safely. We've also come forward to support public health by our members working with management to participate in COVID testing to take some of the burden off of public health personnel there. And we're very proud of the service we provide. And the purpose of me speaking to you folks today is to communicate the value of the service we provide and the need to take a long-term view of the fire service, what it has, what it needs, and where we go from here. I don't want anyone in council to interpret my message as anything less than urgent, but with that in mind, we need to take a long-term view and make plans and work together to get to where we need to go. I sent an email to everyone on council last night, as well as to Mr. Dubé and to Chief Stubing, with some communications of the concerns I have. And this is a period being president of the Halifax Professional Firefighters, where we have a fire chief that advocates service delivery, objective measurement of our performance, and then action on those measurements. In the letter I sent last night, I asked for 6 things, and those 6 things were your continued commitment to staff apparatus at a minimum of 4 people per truck, and consider 5 per truck in areas where service delivery targets are not being met. And following measurement of that, if we continue to not meet key performance indicators in these communities, we should consider additional staffed apparatus in those communities. That, to many of you, may seem impractical or daunting to understand how we get there, but when we put that in the perspective of where we once were, it's important to note that right now on the peninsula of Halifax, that is serviced by 4 fire stations, there are presently 18 firefighters on the University Avenue station, West Street, Lady Hammond Road, and Bayers Road added together. In the 1970s and into the 80s, West Street Station alone had 20 firefighters. And when a fire happened, it didn't drain every resource in the municipality to deal with a standard single-family home on fire. So in my letter last night, I outlined what one single-family 2,000 square foot or less home fire does to our service. And for those of you that had a chance to go through it in detail, the fire in Sackville last Friday night brought trucks from the north end of Dartmouth, Clayton Park, Fall River, Sackville, and Bedford. And that was a 2-story single-family home. And
Brendan, if I could interrupt for a minute,
yes.
You are beyond your 5 minutes. If you could come to a close, please.
My apologies, Councillor. There's much more in my letter. I thank you for your time, and I would welcome any questions that anyone has on this matter. Please review the letter I sent you and take a long, objective look at the fire service, and consult with your fire chief and with your firefighters and with the Firefighters Association on how we move forward to build this service. Thank you for your consideration and your time.
And thank you very much. I appreciate the letter that you sent last night, the additional detail that was in that, your comments this morning. And I would like to open the floor up to questions for clarification. So as usual, any councillors, if you would like to ask Brendan anything, please indicate that in the chat. And go ahead, Councillor Outfit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Brendan. I just wanted to, and obviously we read your presentation, your letter, Brendan, and thank you for that. And we're going to be listening to the chief this morning. As long as I've been on council, we've had this issue of 4 per truck, and as long as I've been on council, we've been passing legislation to say there has to be 4 per truck. And then I hear this morning that you're still concerned about 4 per truck. Can you tell me what's going on there? Because my understanding was 2 councils ago and last council reconfirmed in policy and also by adding crews that we would have 4 per truck.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Otit, for your question. The 4 per truck is an issue that has been so tenuous here from amalgamation up until very recent years that it's important to me that we don't lose sight of it. We had a memorandum of understanding in our collective agreement that expires in the end of May. We're working with Chief Stubing and Mr. Dubé and through you folks to hopefully continue that agreement to keep 4 on each truck. But we've seen in times just this year with the proposal to reduce our budget, how in years previous that could have led to a reversal of the commitment to keep 4 per truck. And we think if there is any one message we can communicate consistently, it is that we need firefighters on fire trucks. And so I apologize if it seems redundant, Councillor, but it's a message that we need to reinforce.
No, I agree. It's an important message. I just thought it's a message that we'd already addressed several times. So I'll check on that when the chief presents. But thanks, Brendan.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Hensby. And David, we can't hear you. David, are you on mute? It seems we don't have Councillor Hensby right now. Can someone please reach out to him? And let's go with Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Brendan, for sending that email last night along with the video. It's and you and I had a productive conversation. You're familiar with my concerns, in particular with Black Point, and as Councillor Outfit has suggested, Council has addressed the policies in regards to the requirement for 4 firefighters per truck. With Black Point having 2 individuals, it ends this new interchange. Certainly there is room to grow considering the increase in traffic on a twinned highway of 103. And so, I'm just wondering, I just wanted to kind of follow what Councillor Outfit had said, and if it's in the policy, and my understanding is you're suggesting that the policy is not actually followed. Is that what you're saying, that we are not getting 4 per truck? That firefighters are going out solo, for example? Just wondering if you can elaborate on that, please.
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for your question. So we had signed in our collective agreement a memorandum of understanding. In 2000, the Halifax professional firefighters agreed to straight time overtime in an agreement that stations would no longer be browned out to avoid paying overtime, and that we would staff to a certain level when available. Following that, there was not a firm commitment made to staff the trucks in core composite stations when overtime was required, that straight time overtime. So we saw all of the trucks in Sackville, the trucks in Bedford, Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage, and Lakeside run routinely with less than 4. We signed a memorandum of understanding in our 2016 round of collective bargaining to, we abandoned at that time pay parity with the police and time and a half overtime to ensure that the fire trucks that had previously been reduced below 4 would run with 4 people. And there was a motion made by Councillor Whitman when staff was removed from Station 56 in Black Point to replace the staff as they had been before with 2 people. And that remained at 2 people, as did Station 11 Patton Road, which operates a 2,000-gallon tanker in Upper Sackville. So with those 2 stations being the exception, the fire service has run with 4-person apparatus every day since December of 2017 when we ratified our collective agreement. And with that being said, our collective agreement expires, and we would love to see, we just want to reinforce that code of the importance of trucks that arrive with the ability to fight a fire.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks, Brendan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. And I do appreciate that confirmation and clarification of that. Councillor Hensby, are you back with us? Councillor Hensby, if you're speaking, I still can't hear you. All right, I don't see any further speakers. So thank you very much, Brendan, for joining us and for presenting your information and your position, and for reaching out to all of us. We really do appreciate your viewpoint on everything that we're going to be discussing today and the items in the capital budget that we will be discussing. At this point, I would like to move along with the staff presentation. This is for, again, Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency. So thank you very much.
Good morning, members of council. I think I have a bit of an echo here, so we'll try to get through the technology challenges, but I think it's sorted itself out. My name is Ken Stubing. I'm the fire chief for Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency and one of the executive directors on Mr. Dubé's senior leadership, executive leadership team. I have here with me today members of our team ready and available to answer any questions that you might have. Jennifer Mark, our coordinator, is here with us today. I have 3 deputy chiefs, Deputy Chief Beals, Deputy Chief Andrews, and Deputy Chief Meldrum, as well as Division Chief Steve Nearing from our performance and safety pillar. I'm certainly supportive of the comments said earlier by our president. Thank you for being here today, Mr. President, and looking forward to present information to you on our business plan and also on our presentation. We're also joined by Division Chief Matt Covey, who's in a different location. Apologize for missing that introduction earlier. The team I mentioned earlier is all in our boardroom, physically distant and maintaining appropriate protocols. I also have Assistant Chief Erica Fleck, who's joining us electronically today and available for questions, but not in English. Apologize that I didn't include them initially. We'll move on with our presentation. If you could hit the next slide, please. So I probably don't need to spend a lot of time talking to council about the mission, but I will take this opportunity to share that we are, despite COVID, continuing to move some of our strategic initiatives ahead. And one of those strategic initiatives is to finalize our strategic plan. It was certainly bogged down a little bit during COVID because we were actually in our community consultation phase for our strategic plan, which certainly is difficult during COVID restrictions. But our mission and our vision will be one of the things that we refresh and revisit as part of that exercise. So do stay tuned as we finalize that over the next year for any minor tweaks to our mission and vision statements. But I am certainly honored to be part of such a great organization with a great history, longest serving fire service in Canada. And our goal is not only to be the longest, but the best for members of council and the communities we serve. If you could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we've divided our service area into 3 major bins that work in concert with the Chief's office. And we subscribe to 3 lines of defense. Those 3 lines of defense are public education, fire prevention, code enforcement, mitigation. That is part of the first service area you see there with community risk reduction initiatives. But we also have bundled into that pillar of responsibility, professional development and logistics, some of which we'll share information later in our presentation today about. So our first 2 lines of defense are in that pillar, and our third and last line of defense is our operations pillar. So that is obviously our emergency response, where the vast majority of our workers work. But we have also engaged, and with the support of our career and volunteer firefighters, the vast majority of our personnel, when we're not out at an emergency call, to assist with the first 2 lines of defense. And we'll show you some success in that front, but also some more work that needs to be done on the first 2 lines of defense. And also our current capabilities as it pertains to emergency response, some of which you just heard about by our president. And then our third pillar is performance and safety. And this is really a new area that we stood up shortly after my arrival. I might be a little bit different than some of my colleagues who are fire chiefs across Canada, largely probably because of some of the experiences I've had in other organizations, but also I've been duly rolled throughout my career as not only a firefighter, but a paramedic. And in the medical profession, it is very common to be evidence-based and make decisions based on data and evidence. So performance and safety certainly echoes some priorities organizationally we have around performance excellence, but also for us, we want to not only be a data-driven organization that can, stand the approval of external scrutiny on our performance, but also do whatever we can to keep our members safe, some of which the president was talking about and will be covered a little bit later in our slide around what the value of a 4-person crew is on our fire apparatus, and also the importance of an effective firefighting force, not only as it pertains to public safety, but also firefighter safety. And as an employer, that is something that we are legislatively responsible to ensure. And then we continue to have strategic initiatives and special projects that are run out of my office. And, we've listed a couple. There's certainly a lot more than that. Some of this includes, pardon me, some of this includes not only ICT or IT projects to have better data, to activate our resources quicker so that they can get to the scene quicker, but also some of the initiatives we're doing on those first 2 lines of defense, such as wildland-urban interface, not only fire suppression, but fire smart programming, which is all around mitigation. Wildland fire safety is a huge risk for our organization, and we are working with partners strategically to try to prevent an incident from happening before it happens. And you can see some of our other priorities there. Next slide, please. So again, this is just a template slide. You will hear later in our presentation that we're in a bit of a hole as a result of our vacancy management that we need to dig out of. You can see that we have vacancy numbers in our career firefighters, which is in the emergency response or operations pillar, the vast majority of our staff. We need to get those firefighters trained, and we will also talk about the addition of new firefighters. As mentioned to you previously, our volunteer sector continues to be a challenge to recruit new volunteers, not only for replacing turnover, turnover that may happen as people go through different stages in their life, or get reassigned to work somewhere else. We do have some example military members who are volunteer firefighters and may get deployed or move somewhere else in the country for their career, which would mean then obviously we need to retrain a new volunteer firefighter to take over that position. So there's a constant churn or turnover in the volunteer sector, but also we have an aging demographic in our volunteer sector, which you can see we have many vacancies for. So one of the values of our service delivery model, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is not just the cost that it costs to run our service delivery model, where we have career volunteers, but there's also value in our response. So we'll highlight a success with Sheet Harbor, having turned that station into a 24-hour station, where in that particular community, where normally the response profile outlined by council and our emergency response time targets would require a volunteer response, we now have a station that has a 24-hour composite model, which is career and volunteer firefighters, and they work together as a team. So we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later, but you can also see the distribution of our staff. We have 51 stations throughout HRM. 24 of those are urban or career only stations. We have 12 career and volunteer or composite stations, 24 hours a day. And we have 22 volunteer only stations. And then obviously we have 9 10.5 hour career composite stations, which we commonly refer to as our E-platoon model. We also have some staff obviously outside of our emergency response pillar, and although sometimes they are not the people you see showing up in the red trucks, they are important for the first two lines of defense, but also training our staff to be the best fire department we can be, and also providing the logistics support to keep the engines running, so to speak. We show 50 members in all of those support divisions, but we do have a bunch of vacancies in those positions that this budget will be looking to replace: prevention officers, training officers, management and support members as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we are also very happy to say that we were successful at launching our Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan. We've been working on this since my arrival for sure, and certainly the team had been doing some work before my arrival. And this would be making good on commitments that we've made with the Human Rights Commission, and also aligns with the corporate framework for diversity and inclusion. We are well into our 5-year roadmap for an action plan to become the best fire service we can be and representative of our community. We also had some success over this last year in getting some of our members trained for our HUSAR program. So just refresh council's memory. We have been tasked by council to re-engage in the federal Heavy Urban Search and Rescue Program, which is the federal strategy to be able to do with catastrophic events, whether that's earthquakes or storms or hurricanes that may cause building collapse or other significant events that require a federal response. So we are one of 6 teams in Canada. Our designation is Task Force 5, and we are quite excited that despite COVID, we were able to get 20 members recertified in building collapse, which is one of the critical skills for that. And that was just before the lockdown happened because of COVID-19. And I am also very, very pleased to have had the pleasure of working with what became known as a COVID-19 task force. Shortly after the EOC was stood down, we had the EOC opened up for about 4 months this year when COVID struck, and that was working with the departments across and the business units across HRM under the leadership of the CAO, and Assistant Chief Fleck was at the EOC along with my fellow directors and members of the corporate communication team and many others in helping address the initial onslaught of issues as it relates to COVID-19. But after the EOC was stood down and business units kind of went back to their day-to-day grind, there still remained many pieces of outstanding work to finish the return to work framework for the municipality. As a result of that, I was asked by the CIO to continue that work on behalf of the corporation. We stood up a task force made up of many people from HRFE, but also members from various business units across HRM, and certainly want to make special mention of the corporate communications team and the safety team that are part of Jerry Blackwell's team. And they were instrumental in working closely with our team to develop a framework that provided all the training required, the tools that were required for business units to safely assess their work, and put a return to work plan in place that met the rigor of Department of Labor as outlined by the public health order. Very successful initiative that I'm very proud of and thankful to have been part of. Next slide, please. Some other successes, you've probably seen some of our social media tweets and Facebook posts on our success of the Williamswood Station. This project was led by Deputy Chief Beals and was the start of defining a workspace that was consistent with not only the organizational values and trying to be connected to a community, but also one that was designed in order to improve firefighter safety, be a resource for the community, and allow us to be able to respond as quickly as possible as part of our emergency response time target strategy. And that is not only for the career members that are in the station in our E-platoon model Monday through Friday for 10.5 hours a day, but also for our volunteers who are responding into that station from their home. Typically when an alarm goes off either during the day with the career members shortly after their departure, or on the weekends or nights when the volunteers will be responding possibly with career members from another station. So this station has been designed and will be our new design template. I imagine we'll find a few things that we want to improve after we work in it for some time, but there was lots of stakeholder consultation in this, including members from the community. Some unique design concepts include joint training and community room. So we do a lot of training and typically build a training room into our facility, but obviously we don't use that training room 24 hours a day. And that training room has been designed to be a community resource that can be used for community meetings or events that go on in the community, and people can access that room even if the fire crew is out of the station, which might be the case on weekends or nights or during the day if the career crew are not there. That same room is also able to be an emergency shelter or a comfort center during an emergency. The whole station is not only built considering minimal impacts to the environment and heating and greenhouse gases, but also is hardened for withstanding storm conditions. There is emergency backup power for not only the fire station, but also the emergency shelter. The station is also designed with an area safe refuge that 24 hours a day, if somebody from the community feels they're at risk, they can step into an area safe refuge. The door will lock behind them and they'll have an emergency access to our 911 call taking center. So we do want this to be something that's readily available for the community and help us draw a closer relationship with the community, which is partly, you know, for a few reasons. One, because that's where we're taking our service delivery model in the future and part of those first two lines of defense, but also it is one of the best strategies that volunteer recruitment has, where people become connected to your service and therefore want to become part of your service. So I would say another success that I'm quite proud of the team for achieving over the last year despite COVID. With council's support, we were able to turn Sheet Harbor into a 24-hour composite station to help address risks on the community, Eastern Shore, identified in our community risk analysis tool that we presented to council in the past. Interesting note, the very first day that station became a 24-hour station, our crew was outside doing, the career crew was outside doing what they historically do, go out and check their equipment, area familiarization, becoming aware of the community, and they happened to notice a house had smoke coming from it. There was no member at home in the house that we're talking about, and the crew promptly responded to that call because they seen it and managed to keep the fire in the room of origin and put the fire out. By the time the individual came back, the situation had been fully resolved. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier by the president, you know, we are also very, very proud of the fact that, you know, despite COVID-19, our service has remained pretty much unaffected as far as our ability to continue providing our service. We'll talk a little bit about kind of the complications of the vacancy shortly, but for all intents and purposes, all our trucks remain staffed at no less than the minimum levels identified earlier by the president. But we were also able to be very engaged in not only the task force work on behalf of the municipality, and Assistant Chief Fleck engaged with public health on a regular basis. As part of that relationship we built with public health, we were also able to partner with them to provide close to, I believe, 100 career firefighters training in the ability to do public health testing. So whenever they require surge testing, as is the case right now, we actually have career firefighters who've been trained in doing the COVID-19 tested, assisting with COVID-19 testing as I speak. So certainly proud of that effort by our members to put up their hands and say, besides my regular duties, I'll agree to help with other public health challenges. Next slide, please. So now that we've gone on and talked a little bit about our successes, we'll talk a little bit about some of the planned activities that we have for this year. As outlined earlier on the HUSAR program, we're continuing to do what we can to improve our capacity. When we originally presented this to council, we did say it would be a multi-year strategy to get all the capabilities required to do the HUSAR program. Certainly COVID has limited our ability to do training because typically that training is at another location. While we did get some in just before the lockdown, We have continued to do some other investments in Hussar, typically acquiring some of our capital needs, emergency generators, emergency tents for emergency shelters, and water supply and tools. So we've typically been investing in capital needs, which is part of our plan, but they were originally planned to be in kind of more out years. We've done a pivot as a result of the challenges of COVID and started to do some of that acquisition sooner rather than later. I'll talk a little bit about Station 8 and headquarters and our campus that were originally planned to move forward this year, actually, in the capital plan, that we've pumped the brakes a little bit on that. We still are committed to needing that facility, not only for headquarters logistics and prevention to be housed at a new campus, but also Station 8. But the data I will share with you later will help you understand why we feel we need to slow down a little bit on that strategy. But we are still committed to that site and are continuing to move forward with the design phase. While we are part of the overall capital strategy for HRM and the limitations within the capital envelope, we did identify the Sheet Harbor Station as a critical need because we have a crew there 24 hours a day, and the station that is there, although we've done some minor improvements to accommodate the crew 24 hours a day, it was not designed for a 24-hour-a-day crew. So we are very hopeful and excited to be part of the Healthy Living Center that is being contemplated for Sheet Harbor, and are currently listed to participate in the design phase to be part of that. And similar to what I talked to you about with Station 62, it's about changing our model to be proactive and engaged with the community, and also a resource for the community between emergencies. We are committed to continuing to improve our emergency response times as we can with our current resources. We'll spend a lot more time on that later. We also are continuing to work with our partners with the GSAR and GEM teams to work closer and better together and identify synergies in order to do that. There's more details in our business plans on that. I think we can move on to the next slide. I'm going to cover a lot of this stuff a little bit later. Thank you. So you will see in our business plans, we are also working with the corporate fleet division and the performance excellence team in order to identify opportunities to work better together with fleet. Not only so the fleet is always available and ready to respond whenever needed, but also to make sure that our future needs are identified. The world of heavy fleet will probably change significantly over the next 4 or 5 years as it pertains to electric vehicles and greener vehicles. We're trying to be ready for that change, but we're also trying to make sure the trucks that we're purchasing are consistent with our service delivery model moving forward, and that both fleet and us are on the same page, not only for acquiring assets for the future, but also to meet council's time requirements for emergency response. You will also see in our business case, we are committed to finalizing the work along with corporate fleet on the Fire Underwriter Survey, which is an assessment done typically every 5 years by fire underwriters. And we've already done the tanker shuttle accreditation, but there's some more data that needs to be added to their portal. And that typically drives business and residential fire insurance rates in the corporate, throughout HRM. So certainly that's important for our residents, and we're committed to getting that work done over the next year. I will talk to you a little bit later about an annual report. We had hoped to have the annual report in your laps today. Unfortunately, we had a couple of changes that we needed to make at the last moment. So we expect to have that annual report to you in the very, very near future, which will be our first annual report. And you might not recall the administrative order that Council set for HRFE requires us to report annually on our performance. So I'll be sharing some of that data with you today, but as part of a strategy to maintain, a history of our performance, we're moving to this strategy to produce an annual report, which will be shared with Council annually. Obviously, it will be tied to the fiscal year because it will also outline our fiscal responsibilities and how we did on that front. But stay tuned, we'll be sharing more information on that. We have a couple of IT projects, one of which is a rostering scheduling project, which is still planned to move forward. Next slide, please. As identified by other business units, we are quite excited to be making some progress on our diversity and inclusion initiatives. We have outlined a 5-year action plan that is consistent with HRM's framework. We have made significant progress over the last year in rolling out the items that are in the action plan. Some of those initiatives are outlined below here. I can also commit that our leadership team is engaging on doing an analysis of our cultural proficiency assessments, and that will be done with CCDI. So that's for our senior leaders to understand their bias, to understand their perspectives, and also understand how we rate as a team when it comes to some of those proficiencies. We continue to engage with our community on our action plan and our partnerships. We can answer more questions you might have of that if you have some a little bit later. But all of these initiatives are trying to be an organization that is certainly a leader, not only for emergency response, but also representative of the community we serve. Next slide, please. So I mentioned a little bit about this earlier. So the picture you see on the right are the 20 individuals that just came back just before COVID locked everything down last year on the building collapse and the HUSAR program that we did. We have already spoke about the framework, so I won't spend much time on that. But some other initiatives that we are very committed to, very similar to other fire services. Succession planning is a huge, huge need in HRFE. Many fire services grew exponentially during the baby boomer phase after World War II. And as such, a lot of the senior officers and leaders in the organization are turning over a couple years ago. So this is data that's a couple years old. It was identified that 75% of the chief officers and leaders in organizations would be retired in 5 years. And that was 2 years ago. So certainly succession planning is a priority for us, but it's more than chief officers. It's, our fire officers, people who will be replacing our captains in the future and preparing to replace our senior firefighters, people who are driving our trucks as engineers. Our succession plan that we are committed to is a wholesome succession plan throughout the organization, with also career path opportunities that branch outside of traditional operational roles only. As part of that strategy, we're looking to become an accredited training institution so that when our firefighters get that training as part of the succession planning strategy, that training has been identified as an industry best practice and one that is defendable. We are also very excited to be well underway with our medical first responder training program. We have opened a new service delivery area based on Council's emergency response time targets, our administrative order as it pertains to emergency medical response. And we are working very closely with EHS to make sure that our medical training is consistent with the calls that we go on and meet our community needs. So we'll bring more information forward to you on that, but that program is moving ahead very, very well. And an example of the things we're able to do by working with our partners is the COVID-19 testing that I identified earlier. We are in the midst of a current recruitment drive for our career members, but we also continue to deal with that constant turnover in the volunteer sector and also try to fill long-standing gaps. Next slide, please. So just a couple of highlights here as it pertains to service excellence. We continue to push the envelope and become a better data-driven decision-making organization. We are piloting a project with Performance Excellence and ICT on being able to have dashboarding capabilities and use that data and display that data in ways that are helpful in not only telling a story on performance, but also used for predictive analysis on future needs moving forward. So we're still in our infancy on those capabilities, but excited to be doing that as a pilot project for HRM as a whole. We continue to strive to build the pieces in the foundation for an organization that can be an accredited organization. So you might be familiar with ISO or some other accreditation body. Our goal would be to become a registered agency this year. It's in our business plans for CFAI, which is an accrediting body for fire services, so that we know that the things that we say are important are actually important in an accreditation concept. And obviously the concepts of accreditation are say what you do what you say, prove what you do. So that's why our efforts have been all around our ability to report data and use data to make decisions, because the accreditation process needs to be able to validate that you can do all of the above. Technology and innovation continues to be a priority for us. You know, if you want to become not only the oldest fire department, but a leader in the fire service, you need to be innovative. So we have a bunch of examples of some of the innovations we're doing. One is the picture that you see on the right. As part of our first two lines of defense, public education is certainly important, and during COVID-19, it was difficult to do public education. You know, simple things, teaching young children to do stop, drop, and roll. We can't go into schools anymore. They were not able to do station visits. So we started to do virtual public education, which we got a lot of positive comments on our social media about allowing people who were, you know, trapped at home, being able to see something a little bit different than what they were being exposed to in other worlds. But another example of our innovation is on our drone program that continues to be heralded as one of the best in the country. We are not only providing the drone support for all the HUSAR teams in the federal response program, we're currently in the midst of being licensed for out of line of sight flight, which is a huge, huge accomplishment. I think we're the first, pardon me, I think we're the first fire service in Canada that has a non-expiring license. Typically, the license expires every year. And we are currently in conversations with Department of Lands and Forests to help them develop their drone capabilities, but also launch our drone on a cost recovery basis to assist them, particularly when they can't fly helicopters over the scene, which is, you know, fairly common at night, but also before they're able to get a helicopter in the air to get quick eyes on the fire and find out where the seat of that wildland fire is. So certainly exciting times there. Next slide, please. So now we're starting to get into some of our data metrics. You probably have seen us present in the past on data that was part of the NBN data sets. HRM has withdrawn from NBN, but we've been allowed to continue measuring those metrics. Obviously, we're not in the NBN data now, that HRM is not part of it. So if you go to the NBN site, you will not see HRFE listed in these data metrics. But we have tried to calculate the metrics that we could, so you could start to see our performance as it relates to not only the cost of our service delivery, but the effectiveness of our service delivery. So this first metric I've shared with council in the past. We've shared it, I think, in 3 years in the previous years I've presented. You'll see, first of all, that we can't measure it this year. And the reason we can't measure it this year is because NBN has does no longer continue using this metric. So there was no way to know what their metrics would be. But also we were not able to get that analytics done by the finance team to assist us with that. But I can tell you that historically, the first 3 years, the cost comparison of our service delivery model was significantly lower than the industry standard, which largely pertains to the efficiency of our service delivery model, where we have so many volunteers and career members working together. A lot of the people who participate in NBN have career-only departments or are smaller composite departments. Next slide, please. So while we might be an efficient service delivery model, these are some of the measures of the effectiveness. So the very first year I came here, I was surprised to see we were reporting 0 in the metric, which really means we had 0 fire fatalities, which is pretty unbelievable. But and this is a per capita analysis. You can see the following year, that was a short-lived success story. That was the fire that we had in Sackville that had some fatalities associated with it. And then the following year, the 1.86, was the year that included the tragic fire, commonly referred to as the Barrow Fire, where we lost many members of one family in one fire. And you can see that we've done the calculation for this last fiscal year and have dropped down from the 1.86 and are approaching a little bit more. We're about half the effectiveness of the NBN data metric. Next slide, please. And a similar metric on performance. This one relates to a per capita assessment of fire civilian injuries. And you can see that, similar to other NBN data, that we have kind of tracked along differently from year to year. So we are still trying to understand the relevance of our response model as it pertains to these metrics. But certainly they're there for your understanding. And we'll move on to the next slide, please. So this metric pertains to structure fires on a per capita basis in HRM compared to the NBN data. You can see, very similar to NBN, we actually seen a decrease. So our numbers had been fairly consistent in the 2 previous years. And you can see we had a bit of a drop this year. Somewhat subjective, I guess, for us to make a decision based on why we think that might have happened. The perspective is that possibly people, I've heard this from some of my colleagues, more people were at home because of isolation and COVID requirements and likely able to find fires or, prevent fires from happening in the first place. But certainly we are still, well above the NBN median. Next slide, please. So I'll beg a little bit of your indulgence as I try to explain the next few slides, because we bounce between calendar year and fiscal year. The slide you see in front of you is actually a screenshot of what will be coming to you very, very shortly on our first annual report. So as mentioned earlier, our annual report will capture performance data and our fiscal responsibilities as it pertains to the fiscal year. And this was our very first annual report, and it is a year old. So we're currently in a fiscal year that will go on for another couple months. So the report that we had wanted to share with you was actually already a year old when it comes to data. The good news is now that we've developed the framework for the annual report, the next annual report will be very, very shortly after our fiscal year ends. So this data that we're showing you, although there's a lot of good news, has no correlation to our staffing during COVID-19. So we felt it was important not only to share the performance metrics that we started to share with you on our emergency response time targets for our fiscal year, but also our calendar year, which are the slides coming up, which are much, much more recent. So this data ended at the beginning of this fiscal year. And you can see that we have, started to make some improvements prior to the changes in the last recast budget. And that was based on trying to use data to deploy our resources where it made sense. You can see that we only had one drop in our performance from the previous year, which was something that we were quite proud of when we did our annual report. Although, please move on to the next slide, you will see as we were preparing for this presentation, we became aware that the data as a result of our last fiscal year was not telling the same story. So while we only had one red down arrow in the previous slide, you will see that this slide is the start of seeing more red arrows. So you can see that our performance dropped in our ability to get a first unit on scene in an urban response area as it pertains to Council's emergency response time target by 8.8% in our performance. We were able to, have a very, very small increase, probably not very statistically significant for our medical response calls, but also I would acknowledge that our medical response calls were significantly down this year when EHS had to stop responding to emergency medical calls, and even after the restart of the medical response program, it's to a limited type of calls. So we can move on to the next slide, please. And these are all the various pieces of our emergency response time targets that we're reporting on. You can see that we did have a bit of an uptick in our rural fires. So these were our day career stations. Our E-platoon model was able to get out the station and first on scene a little bit quicker this year. And our rural fires for the volunteer response time went up as well. Now, I would also say that, historically medical calls have been a huge portion of our call volume. So there was less and less time that medical calls were an impact on the inability to get out for a fire call. You will see, a little bit of a drop, probably not statistically significant in the rural medical calls during the daytime. Although we did have more PPE requirements to don for our medical calls, which might have had some effect on that, and it probably actually played a lot more into the rural medical calls in the volunteer sector because our career members had already screened into the stations at the beginning of their shift and then had small PPE requirements going out on the call. Our volunteers, when they responded to the stations, had to screen into the station so that they didn't contaminate the station for everybody else who would be working out of that station. So that was probably a factor in that last metric. Could you please move on to the next slide? Okay, so these next few slides are very important slides for us to start to frame our performance as it pertains to effective firefighting force. When we originally developed our emergency response time targets as a result of a consultant's analysis, a few consultant reports provided, and council developed not only a service review for our organization, but also developed emergency response time targets. It was identified that we had limited data capabilities. So we have been concentrating on that for 3 years since I've arrived here. And when I first came to council and had my very first presentation, council asked me about what my initial impressions are of the service. And I said I was certainly very proud to be part of the oldest fire department and felt it was an honor and a privilege to have been asked to come to join such a great team. But my initial impressions, while our crews do a tremendous job while they're at the call and seem to, you know, soldier through whatever they're asked to do, my initial impressions were that we were a very lean fire service delivery model as it pertains to a metropolitan department. So we are by definition a metro department, and that would be, you know, a handful of fire departments across Canada that are in that category, I think 13. And we are also a composite service, which makes our peers even less. Of that 13 metro departments, I think there might be 3 other departments who are composite and also metro. The ones that come to mind certainly are Ottawa and Hamilton. I'm not even too sure Sudbury fits that definition. So I could not validate that. It was an anecdotal observation that when council asked me, well, why do you feel that? I tried to, do a presentation in the past that showed a traditional response in the urban area, and we used the peninsula as an example of that. And you could see how one fire would deplete pretty much all the resources required to deal with that single family house dwelling, which is partly what the president was trying to speak to you about. But this data is our first ability to be able to show you our performance, and it required a tremendous amount of work by our performance team to go through and validate this data. We had to use multiple data sources, go through every single data source to validate that it was accurate, and make sure that we were giving council a true and accurate representation of our abilities. I think it tells a very telling story. The blue dots are where we hit council's emergency response time targets. The red dots are where we do not. And the emergency response time targets that I'm talking about are the ability to get 14 firefighters on scene, or 14 firefighters on scene in 11 minutes. And all of these dots, save and except, maybe 2 or 3 at the most, are actually areas where the population density requires us to hit that target. The challenge we have in our data is our divisions 2 and 3 are where these metrics come from, but not all of the calls we go to in those division 2 and 3 units are actually in population density. So I'll give you an example. The one on the very far right, the red dot on the very far right of the screen, is not likely a population density of over 100, but most of the other ones have been gone through and should have a blue dot on them 90% of the time. And you can see our performance is just around 50%. And you can also see that our performance dropped by 5.2% over last year. That's largely because of our vacancy management that we had last year, where we had, although we had 4 firefighters on a truck, we rarely had 5. and we rarely had aerials that had more than 2, which is our staffing requirement for our aerial trucks, because our aerial trucks are in the same station as a 4-person unit. So this really starts to have us question where we have our resources deployed, how many resources we have, and also previous information shared with council and a direction given by council on station 8 and 9. So there's currently a direction from council, and this is what I was talking about, you know, the station 8 project and the headquarters and logistics build needing to be reevaluated. The current direction by council is to build a new station 8 and build a new station 9. And we're supposed to move the crew from station 8, from the current 8 into the new 8, but not move crew from the old 9 to the new 9 until we come back to council to get further direction. So the challenge with that is twofold. We don't know where to build 9 until we know whether or not the crew is going to leave the old 9 to go into the new 9, because station 8 and 9 need to be able to cover each other to achieve enough, you know, a support for each station. So that's the first problem. The second problem is this data basically tells me the original plan for 2 stations does not necessarily make sense anymore. This plan tells us, I believe, that you cannot have 2 firefighters or 2 fire stations staffed with 4 firefighters meet the effective firefighting force, because our current stations can't achieve it anywhere close to the standard. We have engaged in working with a consultant to validate this data. They are experts in the field of predictive analysis and the ability to validate the data that you have. So we still have more work to do on this front, and we are committed to that. And we also have ICT projects that are meant to speed up our ability to get out the station. Now, some of those projects have been slowed down in this capital plan that's in front of council, but there are still projects meant to, you know, validate data, improve our data capability, but also speed up the calls to get us there quicker. I was also asked by council, by a councillor in the relatively recent past, about how I felt we were doing when it comes to growth. And I was uncomfortable with the question because I don't feel that we are prepared for growth, and I don't feel we're mature enough as an organization for predictive analysis of future growth. We are just getting to the point where we can tell you the story about what happened in the past, which is what this is. This is a retrospective analysis on actual calls we responded to in the last year and based on our actual data. So next slide, I have another illustration on this. So we are going to demonstrate what actually happens and help you understand the challenges we have when it comes to real-time response capabilities. So you will see we have identified stations here and a location of a fire. So the illustrations that you will see are based on our actual data and our performance to achieve it. So if you were to have a fire start in the region identified on the map, you would see a delay in order to, before you actually hear fire truck sirens coming. So we'll try to describe what each one of those stages are. On the right side of the screen, you see a clock at the top, and you see the emergency response time targets listed underneath the clock. One for dispatch, one for turnout, one for first unit on scene, and one for an effective firefighting force, which is 14 firefighters in 11 minutes. And this is in our urban response model, which is 100 people per square kilometer. So could you please click the next slide? So your first thing you'll notice is the timer went to 1 minute and 30 seconds. That is the 90-second dispatch time. Although the fire is going, there has been no crews notified. The crews are just getting notified at 1 minute and 30 seconds. We cannot hit that performance target 90% of the time. We have ICT projects and we're working with IES to be able to do better at that, but that continues to be a place we're trying to shave seconds off our response time. Please hit the next button. 3 minutes into the call, you've not yet heard a siren. Crews are just stepping into the truck and about to leave the station. So if this was your house, you're 3 minutes into a fire and you've not yet heard a siren. We are far from this metric. Our ICT projects are trying to shave time off this metric. Part of our challenge is the old technology we have. The other challenge we have is the amount of stations that we need to activate with that old technology to go to this call. So in a not so lean metropolitan department, you might have 2 stations respond to this call to achieve your effective firefighting force, which would mean you only have to activate the technology to alert 2 stations. We have to alert in sometimes, upwards of 30, 40 seconds of technology time to notify many, many stations, because it's like turning on a switch for different lights. Instead of a switch turning on 7 lights, you have 7 switches to turn on 7 lights. And not only is it a delay in their travel time because they're coming from a station farther away, there's a delay in the technology to turn them out, to even let them know there's a call in their area. Next slide. So what you can see now is the first unit is supposed to be on scene in 5 minutes after they're activated, which is a total of 8 minutes. So we are fairly close in that metric. That's the good news. The bad news is the next metric. Please hit next. So now you can see the trucks moving from all across our urban footprint to try to get to that call with 14 firefighters in 11 minutes. And you can see we didn't hit the metric even close. The trucks that you see with red X's are not there on time. You can see 2 trucks are there on time. You can also see a truck with a volunteer marking on it from Station 8, which is probably one of our higher performing volunteer stations in the urban core, largely probably based on the density of population around the station, their ability to get out of the station quickly. Our metrics as it pertains to emergency response time target for volunteers is 6 minutes to be to the station, then turn out from the station and get to the scene. That means the fire would have to be within 2 minutes from the station as far as a drive in order for them to get there in the 8 minutes that we identified. So certainly we have some challenges. And you can also see that we've tried to stand up stations 9 and 10 with the volunteer sector. You can see we've left a lot of stations in the urban core empty to respond to this one fire. And this presentation was done some time ago to be able to tell this story on the red dots and blue dots. And on the next slide, please don't proceed to that yet. I'm going to try to help you understand what we've called here is how red the red dots are versus how blue the blue dots are. So how far away the red dots are from becoming blue dots. We'll try to show you that. But this particular example is not very far from what just happened last weekend that our president just spoke about. We had a call in Sackville that started off as a typical 2-story single-family structure in which we had a firefighter get in a mayday situation very quickly, 2 minutes on scene. And we were not able to get enough firefighters there quickly. We were very, very fortunate to have the second in crew be able to effect the rescue of the firefighter or the firefighters that were in the Mayday situation. Had this been any worse, we could have had a much worse outcome. So I think it's important that council understands the effective firefighting force is not just about public safety, it's about firefighter safety. So could you move on to the next slide, please? So this is our attempt to try and demonstrate to council, and this is accurate data. This is our own data, help you understand how far the red dots are from the blue dots. So the red line on this graph says what the 90th percentile is. So our 90th percentile should be all 14 firefighters. So the bottom axis is 14 firefighters. That red line should be on the bottom blue dot. You can see that all our 90th percentile can do in our urban area is 8 firefighters on scene. So we are far, and you can see how typically they show up in groups of 4, which is the whole issue around the importance of 4. You can see that basically we have 2 trucks of 4 people that get there on time. The reason the next plateau is not so clearly a plateau of 4 is because it could be a 2-person aerial unit arriving. It could be a 2 firefighter tactical unit arriving. It could be a platoon captain arriving in a single person in a vehicle, or an incident commander arriving in an individual vehicle. So that's why that next plateau is not a clear plateau of 4. And we are drawing people in from a far way away to be able to achieve that. So you'll see at the bottom of the slide, in order to start addressing this gap in performance, HRFE plans to add 12 firefighters to the deployment, which can be covered within the current wage model. And we plan to bring them on board to also backfill the vacancies, in addition to the current vacancies, with our recruit training program, providing our budget gets approved as outlined. They would be starting their recruit training in August and operational near the end of the calendar year. And those additional firefighters are there for a couple reasons. 2 firefighters will be assigned to Black Point to address a problem that's been long-standing with 2 firefighters in that station, which are at the most southern area of our response area and pretty far away from backup. So we continue every day when we have extra firefighters on duty, the first place we deploy them is to Black Point. And the reason we put them at Black Point is to address the concern we have for firefighter safety. So by putting 2 firefighters at that station, that will allow us now to redeploy those other 2 firefighters in a place that makes sense for the effective firefighting force. We would also take the additional 10 firefighters and deploy them in current locations to address the performance issues at Bedford and Sackville locations, and utilize additional firefighters that we were normally putting in Black Point in the past to assist with other areas like Spryfield and Eastern Passage. Next slide, please. So we'll talk a little bit about our performance as it relates to our legislated responsibility to do inspections. And these are slides that we've shared with you in the past. Quite proud of the efforts of the team there, despite many changes in the way we've structured the work in fire prevention and the challenges of COVID. That team continues to do great work. You can see in 2016, we structured work differently to be able to do more inspections. And the big bump there was largely attributed to what we call our FSMIs. So you can see prior to 2016, we didn't have any FSMIs. And FSMIs are inspections done by our firefighters, who are actually on fire trucks, our last line of defense, helping with basic inspections that are legislated to be done as part of our responsibilities outlined by the province. So the good news is we improved our performance significantly when we started that program. We were supposed to launch phase 2 of our FSMI program this year, which would add more buildings types like bars and strip malls to our FSMI inspections. But based on COVID, we were unable to do that. So we still have plans to improve our performance in that area, but I'll share with you some concerns a little bit later. So these are completed inspection files by calendar year. Next slide. So this slide is mistitled. These are actually completed inspections. So the previous slide was completed files. These are completed inspections. So if you could hit backspace, I'll just draw your attention on the previous slide. The bottom right-hand corner, you can see level 1 inspections. These are inspections done by our fire inspectors, our experts, fire prevention officers and fire inspectors, experts on inspections. The bottom right corner shows you that the completed files were 386 in the last year. If you could just remember that number, move to the next slide, please. The difference in the number that you see in the bottom right shows you that it took 899 inspections to complete those files. So what this tells you is many times there's repeat inspections to make sure people come in compliance. So the previous slide is not a true representation of the work being done by the branch. It takes many, many inspections sometimes, follow-up inspections to make sure people are compliant. Next slide, please. And this is just a representation of the requests that we get for through customer service. So you can see a lot of times that our requests for public education, obviously due to COVID, we had a drop in the requests for public education, but certainly still happy to say that a lot of our inspection and general items continue to track along despite COVID. Next slide, please. So here is another important thing that we've not yet shared with council. So again, this is, as we dive into our data and understand our ability to perform as expected by council and legislatively required to do so. While we did tell you a good news story starting in 2016, that we have done many more inspections based on reorganizing the work, this represents the number of completed inspections required by legislation. So despite all of those changes in 2016, the best we've been able to achieve is 20% of our mandated inspections. You can see there was a bit of a drop in 2019 and a little bit of a drop in 2020. That's for a few reasons. One, we onboarded a bunch of new staff in 2019. And in 2020, we actually improved our data understanding of the buildings that so we're working closely with planning and development to understand the buildings that actually should be inspected. So we are trying to streamline our process and our red tape reduction initiatives, focus our efforts on fire safety inspections and fire code inspections and working with planning so they can work on building inspections. This drop in performance is not a drop in inspections, it's an increase in buildings that were not used in our metrics in the past. So you can see that although we have more plans to make changes in the way we do inspections, increasing our FSMIs as mentioned earlier, we don't believe that will be enough to move us closer to our legislated responsibilities. So we're looking to add two new inspectors to our branch, and that can be accommodated within our current budget model. Next slide, please. So I apologize that this is maybe so difficult to read, but I'll just draw your attention quickly down to the bottom as it pertains to the budget that was originally planned before we did the recast budget. So in the second column near the bottom of the first table, you will see we were looking originally at what was going to be a $74 million budget. As with other business units, we went into a recast budget in June, and you can see that our budget was changed from 74 million to 71,360 some odd $1,000. I can tell you that we're looking to track a little bit over budget this year, but certainly we're proud of the team's effort to continue staffing stations and do the important work that we do. But we did track a little bit over our budget this year. You can see in working with the finance team, we've recast a budget that is closer to what we were probably earmarking for had we not had the recast budget. So the positions that are really a challenge for us are actually the vacancies. The vacancies that we have for firefighters as a result of the recast budget last year are required to be backfilled with overtime. So I did send a briefing note to each of you yesterday that outlined why there was $1 million added to our overtime budget. And I tried to explain in there that part of it was to deal with the backlog of vacancies from last year, because we still need to backfill those positions with 4 firefighters on a truck, as mentioned earlier. But we also need to hire the new recruits, and they will not become operational till the end of the calendar year. So we basically need to staff 2 positions, the one in the recruit training class plus the one backfilling the vacancy for the vacancies we had last year. Then there's additional vacancies that will be occurred this year because of retirements, and obviously the implementing of the 12 firefighters and the 2 inspectors. Next slide, please. And this is just a breakdown of how that budget is distributed throughout the various areas. You can see that the bottom row, which we have as community risk reduction, professional development, and logistics, there's a bump in that particular budget, and that is restoring the non-comp items that have been talked about in council for 3 years that were lost during the recast budget. So that would be to buy turnout gear for firefighters, replace equipment, and training needs for our firefighters, which was part of the strategy to hit the target last year, largely because we were not going to train new firefighters as a result of the vacancy target. Next slide, please. So here you can see the template slide on staff counts. What we can share with you is, as with many of the other business units during the recast budget, our casual and term positions were not moving forward. So we had some 2 interns that were working on 2 projects, one in community risk reduction, which led to building the tool that you had seen in the recast budget on the risks associated with the Eastern Shore. So that position is vacant. That's you can see that's one of the 1.5 positions that's vacant. And the other individual was working closely with our emergency management team and reported to Erica Fleck. That position, although is vacant, is being replaced with a new FTE, which will be solely tasked for emergency management. So their title is actually assistant coordinator, and will be working very closely with Assistant Chief Fleck and under the direction of the CIO's office for emergency management, largely to deal with some of those emergency management risk reduction initiatives. And then you can see also the addition of the 12 firefighters and the 2 inspectors. which can all be accommodated within this wage model. Next slide, please. And here would be a summary of the changes, particularly those non-comp items that I identified earlier down in the bottom. So you can see the first position is the Emergency Management Assistant Coordinator. You can see the increase to the wage and budget, which is basically refilling those vacancies. The $1 million for overtime specifically to maintain the positions that are going to be in the recruit training course that I talked to you about. The WCB coverage that was taken out last year during the, this is as a result of legislated changes in the province to cover volunteer firefighters with WCB. You can also see that there's a change in a secondment recovery. So the work that we were doing with the province on red tape reduction has ceased, and the revenue that we were getting to offset that secondment is now being added back to our budget because we're not getting it from the province. And then you can see our non-comp items, which are basically historical overspend. So before the recast budget, the budget I identified in March of last year was originally going to put this money in our budget because we had demonstrated that we have historically been overspent in that area for 3 years. So I think sorry, I hit the mute button by mistake. Next slide, please. And therein lies our presentation. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chair. I apologize if I took too long to get through that. There was a lot of information that I've got asked many questions by councillors on, and I was trying to head some of them off at the pass.
And I appreciate that. Thank you very much for that very fulsome presentation. I especially like/hate the illustrations that you showed on slides 19, 20, and 21. At this point, I would like to head over to Councillor Mancini. Would you mind putting the motion on the floor, Councillor?
Mr. Chair, we're happy to put the motion on the floor that the Budget Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to incorporate the Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency proposed 2021-22 budget and business plan as set out and discussed in the February 24, 2021 staff report and supporting presentation by staff into the draft of the 2021-22 operating budget. So moved.
Thank you. Can I think that was Councillor Outfit first. Go ahead, Councillor Mancini.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief, thank you for that very brief presentation as always. No, I'm kidding you, Chief. Thank you very much for that detailed presentation. A lot of area to cover. First of all, both the President, Brendan, and you alluded to the fire in Sackville. You talked about the May Day that occurred. How is your firefighter doing? You had one firefighter that was injured, had to go to the hospital. Can you give us a brief update on how he is doing?
Certainly, Councillor, and through the chair to your question, thank you for the question. Both Deputy Chief Andrews and I went out last night, which was the first shift back to work since the situation, and visited with the first two stations involved in the call, and certainly all those firefighters are back to work. But I think, you know, there was certainly some concerns. You know, obviously they're playing the scenario over and over and over in their head. We were very fortunate to have had a crew that did all the work prior to the Mayday to allow them to successfully be extricated from the building. So, you know, what we had explained to them is it's a dangerous, you know, they certainly know this, but we were just reassuring them that we understood this. This is a dangerous job. It's a dangerous occupation. And even when you do things right, sometimes things can go bad. So we are very fortunate that the things that they had done right initially allowed them to be able to get out of that situation. So thank you for asking.
And so he is out of the hospital. Is he back to work, the firefighter that went to the hospital? He is, good.
Yes.
Glad to hear that, Chief, and our thoughts are with him and his family. You know, I want to congratulate you with regard to the COVID-19 budget. As you alluded in your presentation, you were cut by $3.5 million and executed the service. Thank you very much. You know, with regard to the budget and the reason that we're here today, I have no problem with being proposed in the budget. I support that budget, and I hope my colleagues will support that budget also. My questions today are really around the effective firefighting force. And, you know, some of your comments, and we heard from the president also, you know, are we prepared for the growth? We've seen a tremendous amount of growth in HRM in the last number of years. And, you know, we all we have to do is go to places like Spryfield and Sackville and West Bedford and take a look at the high rises we now have. And we approved some more new high rises in Councillor Morris's area just recently. And then we have the, you know, the Willow Tree high rise that's going up. And I think of the growth that's happening in my district, District 6 in Dartmouth. We have proposals for Port Wallace, and that's potentially 10,000 people will live in that area. Shannon Park, 7,500 people in that area. And so it can, you know, are we prepared for the growth? And for you to say, you know, that was uncomfortable for you to respond, that we're not prepared for the growth is concerning. So you alluded to there is a consultant's report that's coming back, and I believe there's a census report that's coming back. I'm really feeling what we need today to move forward and prepare for this growth. We really need a long-term strategy when it comes to effective firefighting. It's very easy, you know, everyone loves the fire service. I put it in the same category as our libraries. We had libraries not that long ago. Everybody wants to give the library lots of money, and same with fire service. But our job as councillors, Chief, is we have to balance that with all the other services that we have. And it'd be easy for us to say, okay, let's add extra number of zeros to your budget so you could staff up or have equipment or fire stations in the right area. So my question is, you know, are we going to get an actual strategy so we can plan for this properly? And when will we get the information back from the consultant station, so the consultant's report and the census report? Because I feel that's the foundation of this long-term strategy. I think Brendan, in his opening remarks, he alluded to a long-term view of fire services, and that's what I need as a councillor. I think that's what my colleagues need. So if you could just talk to that, that'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, good question. Difficult to answer, but I'll try my best. You know, I've used this analogy with some of my team, and I've also shared it with Brendan in the past. It's like deciding you want to build a house, right? So you have this vision of a beautiful 2-story single family dwelling, you know, that's picture perfect for where you want to spend the rest of your life. You can't start framing the roof before you build the foundation. So the foundation of our service delivery model, and I'll give credit where credit's due. Council, you have given us a good foundation. Our foundation is the administrative order, which clearly outlines to us and to members of this community what the service expectations are by council for us to perform. And you have also outlined an emergency response time target that is a blend of 1710 and 1720, the NFPA standards, the National Fire Protection Association standards for career and volunteer response. So we certainly have challenges with our service delivery model. I spent 8 years as a deputy, and I was in performance, and we were a data-driven fire EMS service, but our model was urban. We only had career members, career firefighters and paramedics. And if you've never been to Winnipeg, it is surrounded by a highway. It's basically like an island. The city has a ring road around it. And basically everything inside the ring road, there's a couple exceptions, but basically everything inside that ring road, the highway that goes around Winnipeg, a complete circle, is an urban response. And it is very easy to deploy your resources in that model. You can have stations converge on a fire from multiple locations. Our challenge outside the urban footprint is, and even on the edges of our urban footprint, is we have stations passing a station that's already gone to the call because of the way our city and our streets are laid out. And that's no slam at our planning and our street development, is just the way our province is, developed. Most of our roads are along the shoreline, and we have station past a station who's already 5 minutes down the road going to the exact same call. That means they're going to be 5 minutes behind the station, and then we have the third station coming behind them. So instead of units converging on a call, they're typically going one after another, which is some of the challenges that we have in our effective firefighting force. We are also starting, we shared this with council when we developed the emergency response time targets. We're starting in a hole in that we're 25% longer than the industry best practice with how long it takes the first unit to get there in the urban setting. Most places it's 4 minutes. We are 5. So we're 25% longer than the industry best practice, which means we're making it harder for those second in and third in and fourth units to get there because they're starting a minute behind everyone else in following that standard. So the good news is we have a good administrative order. We have a clear emergency response time target. The bad news is we're showing you the data that says last year's response, not next year's response, last year's response, we're 50% away from the target. So the only way to fix that problem right now is reevaluate station locations, reevaluate, the staff that we have. So we're making an investment this year in staff and where we're deploying those staff. So we have a little bit of latitude when it comes to when we have extra firefighters on duty, where we put them. So while we maintain no less than 4 on a truck, there are times that sometimes we have extra firefighters on shift where we might have 5. Sometimes we might have 3 on an aerial instead of 2. But the amount of times we had this last year because of the vacancy target was almost never. So we need to get those firefighters back in the system, get the recruits hired, get them trained, add the new firefighters, deploy them based on what we know now with our data, because I did not know that when I first came here. We didn't have that ability to do that analysis and work with this consultant to say, okay, right, where should we deploy, where's the first place we should put the first extra firefighter when we have them. So this is a drop, this is a step in the right direction, but more steps are required. I don't know if it fully answers your question, but that consultant's report will be helpful when we come back to council after this budget on the station 8 and 9 issue that I brought up earlier, get clarity on that. And once we know the direction we have on council for that, we can continue to follow that investment strategy. The work that's done when we get a census report that tells us that Tintallon has gone to 100 people per square kilometer, that's retrospective, right? We're going to know that we already have the population density. That's the trigger to go to a 24-hour station, but it's also the trigger for an effective firefighting force. So it's not just a career station 24 hours a day like we did with Fall River. It's also the rest of the effective firefighting force.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, my time's obviously up. I'll come back to it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chief Stubing. Thank you for the very thorough presentation. I think, in the short time you've been with us, every year it gets, as Councillor Mancini said, a little longer, but way more information and a lot more to go on in terms of our decision making. And thanks to you and your members for helping keep our communities safe. We appreciate that. I particularly enjoyed the map of your blue and red dots, and I can't think of a better argument against kind of that low density car dependent sprawl development that we've had for the last half century. It puts you in a difficult position because you're dealing with this legacy infrastructure, and how do you protect it properly, which brings up those response time metrics that you had. But like police, for example, they have a response time target as well. But when they present to us, they present things like on the number of violent crimes that happen, the number of nonviolent crimes, crime severity indices. Are there any metrics, or is there some data where you can compare us to us in the past or us to other cities on things like fire loss insurance claims, on loss of life or injury in fires? So the response time is a process to help us get to an outcome. The outcome is less loss and less injury and death. Do we have any data on those kinds of things?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, great question. That's one of the reasons we want to become accredited. Because as you follow accreditation concepts, you don't only have to follow the procedures involved with accreditation, there are performance metrics that are typically part of that accreditation, so that's part of it. Two, the stuff that we had on NBN data are some of the kind of primary examples used in Canada on, you know, effectiveness of your response. So that outlined, I can't remember what the slides are off the top of my head, but the NBN data talks about fire fatalities per 1,000, fire structure fires per 1,000, and civilian injuries per 1,000 as it pertains to fire. So those are some examples, but we continue to say we want to know other industry best practices, and our handcuffs have not been a desire to do it. Our handcuffs have been our IT and technology abilities to be able to measure and validate. Because, you know, once you report it, you need to be 100% confident in the fact that that data is accurate and reproducible. So we're in our infancy on being able to provide more analytics. You will see shortly our annual report, which will have our first attempt at doing some of those analytics. And my vision of an annual report is not a glossy, you know, 30-page book of pictures and stories. It's analytics. So the first one will be a little bit of both because we just didn't have enough analytics to do it, but that's where we're going. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And just very quickly, when you look at the composite model that we have, and you look at sort of, in quotes, volunteer firefighters, those volunteers get paid sort of an annual honorarium, if you will, and I think the average is around $3,000 per year for our volunteers. So do you think recruiting volunteers is difficult because they're called volunteers and people assume that, you know, there's no compensation? I was a reservist in the Army for a number of years, and if they had said it's a volunteer militia, I don't know if I would have shown up. In the US, obviously, they get a lot more people in that kind of model. But here, like, do you think maybe reimagining what our in quotes volunteer force looks like, and how, you know, they're part-time firefighters more than volunteer firefighters? Is there any way that we can reimagine what that looks like, even if it's not a lot different from what you actually do, to market it differently, to get more people involved, especially in those suburban and rural areas where we do have those volunteers?
Thank you. Through the chair to your question, Councillor. Good question. I'm going to ask my deputy chief, who's heading up our volunteer program, to speak to that, Deputy Chief Meldrum, but I'll maybe give you kind of a little bit of personal perspective while he prepares for that. Where I came from, we had a similar service delivery model, about half the size of HRM, but a large contingent of volunteers. And we asked that question very specifically to the volunteers, right? And we have a committee that's working here on revisioning and trying to address this issue, and not enough volunteers. And I can tell you where I came from. When we asked that question, it was 50-50. Was pretty much 50-50 was the answer. Some of our volunteer firefighters were insulted that you think that they're doing this for money, and they don't want to be received in their community as doing it for money. They are giving their time for a community need. And then we had others who were totally opposite to that said, I'm not a volunteer, I'm a member of this organization and I'm committed and I'm engaged to that vision. So that is certainly, there's some information we could share possibly offline that are other things to consider when you talk about whether they're volunteers or not. But certainly there is that personal feeling about whether they're volunteering their time versus a paid employee. Did you want to add more to that, Deputy Chief Meldrum?
Very briefly for the councillor, I know his time is limited. Should I sit in your seat?
Right there is good. Oh, sorry, yeah, come over.
There's no camera in that seat.
Sorry, we just have some technology issues. I got to get out of my seat.
He did that on purpose to show how much IT investment they need.
We're sharing technology, obviously. So through the chair to you, Councillor, thanks for the question. I think the chief answered it well. I would add, certainly we do have a little over $2 million in honorarium that we use to recognize what our volunteers do, and some of that is in a credit-based system. We have additional stipends for officers and our volunteers who take on additional responsibility, and that means more time away from their families. So we appreciate those captains and lieutenants, and we show them that with a stipend. There's an awards account as well, $100 per member is a bit of a thank you, and some other thank you things we do. And it's true, some of our volunteers actually really appreciate that financial incentive. It's time to pay out in November, just before Christmas, for this very reason. It's timely in that way. But when we did a satisfaction survey of our existing volunteers in 2018, 2019, we found that the great majority were more interested in sense of community. They were interested in a sense of belonging to their group. So their particular community fire department was highly, highly important. And not surprisingly, the opportunity to be engaged and stimulated by something that was very different than what they might do at home. So you're right, there's a bit of both. We have some ideas about how we might consider evolving our volunteer force, and we'll be doing more stakeholder consultation in the coming year.
Thank you, Deputy, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chief, for this great presentation. I really appreciate all the information that you've provided. I do also want to recognize not only the firefighters, but the families of the firefighters who commit a lot, to be there for them, to help them get out the door, and also to be there when they come home after a fire or a vehicle collision or any emergency. So I do want to recognize the families and the role that they play to support the firefighters. And what I'm hearing from this presentation is that we don't really have a firm long-term strategy. We are not effectively prepared for growth. I absolutely 100% support your budget and the direction that you're taking fire service in, and sincerely appreciate where you've been and where you're going to, and I think that you've done a great job pulling this municipality in the right direction, as well as the partnerships that we have with neighboring municipalities. So I can appreciate that. And unfortunately, we're in a situation where you have to look back in order to move forward, and you've pointed out with Tantallon, we need that census, we need that data in order to showcase that, yep, we do have the 100 people that we need per square kilometer, and we are growing quickly. And I take the point that Brendan made in his email about developments and the need for fire service to be a partner in reviewing the developments and ensuring that we consider the impact of developments, impact of traffic calming, for example, on roads in subdivisions, lack of second exits, all of these things that really do impact the safety and security of our communities. I've had lots of great conversations with Assistant Chief Fleck. She's running a tight ship with what she has, and evacuation planning, as we've discussed, are extremely important. Making sure that we have residents as partners in our evacuation planning for our communities, and that they're fully engaged. Black Point, while I recognize, what the previous councillor was attempting to do, it's not enough having 2 firefighters, on shift. And honestly, having a firefighter on the side of the road of the 103, kind of waving down someone to assist them in a massive vehicle collision, that's just not adequate. So definitely need more people, more members to assist us with those. I'm pleased to see the changes with M200 and the work that you're doing with planning and development. That's really important to, recognize, whose bailiwick is which, to make sure that we're firm and lean and being able to do the work that we need to do. But my question to you, is around the slides, the KPI slides, Chief, that you showed us on urban emergency response times. And what I don't see is rural emergency response times. And wondering whether or not we even have the data to be able to showcase that information. I know that it's difficult to get into some of these rural areas, and certainly when we are relying on volunteer, we've got, I think you said 22 volunteer stations overall, and those are all in rural communities, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And so what do you have for KPIs for rural response time?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, great question. Our emergency response time target for the volunteer sector or rural communities is limited to the first, the turnout time, 6 minutes, and then travel time added to that. We have no emergency response time target as it pertains to effective firefighting force, because there really is not much out there for an industry standard, because typically it's based on travel time. So rural communities are spread farther apart, and what they say is the industry best practice is you should base it based on your community risk. So the presentation that we did in our last budget meeting with the previous council identified, I didn't put that presentation in here because we're only, a couple months into Sheet Harbor being staffed 24 hours a day to understand how we've done on that community risk slide. The community risk, the tool that we developed, takes a look at building infrastructure, so the building envelope that exists in the community, identify risk, whether that's wildland, urban interface, or whatever that is, maybe industry in the area, along with our historical data on responses and our resources to respond to those risks. And that paints a picture of risk in the community. And we use color to do that. Red was bad, good was green. So community risk is ultimately, what industries are using, or, best practice in fire services is using to, try to figure out what the right response model is. We do have in our ICT projects that identified as a data collection capability. So right now we don't have the ability to capture all our volunteers on scene, because sometimes they show up in personal vehicles. So we're relying on automatic vehicle locator data to do what you've seen today with the blue dots and red dots, and then go in and validate on the occasion that a volunteer is part of that response, like in the Station 8 example. We have to go in and validate that we actually had 4 volunteers on that truck. Like, this is a manual process to go through all of that call data, look at the paperwork, and say, yeah, we had 4 volunteers on that truck, or 5, or whatever the number was, and apply that to the effective firefighting force. Our goal in our ICT roadmap is to be able to have a way to capture that electronically and be able to produce that data. So although there is no kind of achievable number in our response time target. We would like to be able to tell council how quickly we could achieve it in the last year, but we are years away from that data capability currently.
Do I have one more question? No? One more sec. I just wanted to point out that ICT roadmap and how Everbridge is going to be expanded, you know, in meeting some of these communication needs. And I'll come back.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mayor Savage.
Thank you, Chair and Chief. Good to see you. Thank you very much for your detailed presentation, and thank you as well to Brendan. And one of the things that I think has worked for the city over the last number of years has been a good working relationship between our firefighters and yourself and your department. I just want to speak to growth. You know, nobody's prouder of the growth of our city than I am in the last 5 years. In the last 5 years, our population has gone from 416,000 to 448,000, which is a 7.7% growth. Much of that in the core of the city, which allows us now to look at other areas. But the fire budget in that period of time has gone from 58 million to 76 million, which is over 30%, 31% increase. I think people need to understand that this council has been very supportive of the fire department, fire service. And I think one of the reasons is the relationship that you have with Brendan and other folks. It's going to be increasingly a challenge. We can't, you know, when our overall budget in that period of time has gone up 13.7%, the fire budget's gone up 31%. And every week we come across something that is the most important thing. It was libraries, then it was police, then it's traffic calming. We haven't even done transport, public works, and parks. So we have challenges that we need to manage, and I think we all have to do this together. I don't think, you know, that we've made mistakes at all in making those investments, but it's a challenge to see budgets going up in certain departments. So we have to figure some of these things out together. I guess my question, I have no problem with your budget this year. Thank you very much, but it looks like we'll get the 12 firefighters that we're going to hire will come in late in the year. What's next year's budget going to look like, Chief?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Mayor, thank you for your question. It's a bit of a crystal ball to say what next year will look like, obviously, but we are expecting there to be less pressure on the overtime line, because you might recall last year, $1 million was added to our budget for overtime, largely because we couldn't, even if council chose to take the vacancy target away from us last year, we didn't have a pool of eligible candidates to train. So we decided last year, you know, in the budget process, to put the money in overtime to backfill the vacancies instead of hiring new recruits to fill the vacancies. So that $1 million ended up being short because we were kind of doing it on the spur of the moment to keep stations open. So the $1 million added this year is meant to top up that amount for the vacancies that we still have that were created last year, plus the additional this year. So my point is that $2 million in overtime will probably be able to offset any costs increase. Obviously, we're in contract negotiations, so certainly there may be changes there, but we believe that there will be pressure relief on the overtime line because the new recruits will then be in those stations and not have to be backfilled at overtime rates.
Thank you for that. And you know what, we have very dedicated fire personnel, not only in terms of the fires. I remember Councillor Mancini, Councillor Adams and I went to visit the stations after that horrific fire in Spryfield, and it was very emotional to talk to people who were so dedicated to their job and to see the impact that the work has on them. Second question, Chief, is how are we doing in terms of diversifying the fire service? Women, African, Nova Scotian, Mi'kmaq, people of First Nations descent. We have targets for that, and can you sort of speak to that a little bit?
Great question, Mr. Mayor. I will probably pass the talking stick over to Deputy Chief Meldrum, so I'll be getting out of my seat here in a second to give up my camera. But let me first say, you know, we're not where we want to be, right? We want to be representative of our community. We've done lots of work to prepare our culture to be a culture and an organization that people could see themselves being a part of, and do not land in a workplace that's not ready to support a diverse workforce. But we still have work to do. So I'm going to pass that over to my deputy, who will speak to your question specifically.
Well, while Dave is coming in, I'll just recommend to councillors that if you get a chance to go out to Camp Courage when they have the camps for potential female firefighters, it's pretty inspiring. Hello, David.
Good morning. Through the chair to you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the question. Absolutely top of mind, both diversity and inclusion, because you can't have one without the other. As the chief inferred, we're not where we want to be. Firstly, we're not where we want to be with self-identification data. So we're working very closely with human resources to make sure we truly understand the makeup of who we are. In our recent 2018-2019 self-selection survey, the 52% of our workforce who did self-ID showed us that we're close to being representative in some categories, i.e. visibly racial people and people from First Nations, but not where we want to be yet. We're way behind in some other categories, notably women for sure. 2S LGBTQ+ communities are examples of where we're way behind, and persons with disabilities. So we are absolutely taking action on that, Mr. Mayor, on both our volunteer and career workforces. The recruitment that's underway right now is both competency and equity based. So this is difficult and dangerous work, as we're hearing today. So everyone must pass, but advancement through our system will be informed by performance scores and equity selections. So we believe we're going to create a candidate hiring pool that's reflective of HRM, that it's core to our values and important to us. As we do that, we'll also be working on inclusion. So you heard the chief talk about our 5-year plan, because it's no good to land people in here if they don't feel and believe they're welcome and valued. So we're going to do all that, and we're going to work with HR to bring back stronger, more fulsome self-ID data for this entire fire service.
Thank you for that.
Very welcome.
Thank you very much, Councillor Outfit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief, for the presentation. I certainly support where you're heading on this and your budget. I think that the visual aid that you used there about response times in Bedford-Sackville, for particularly there, was helpful. So we have growing areas, and so much of our growth actually has been in the suburban and rural areas, not just in the core. And we see so much more density now in the suburban areas, both in the size of houses and lots and the number of high rises. So I think you're faced with a challenge there, but also an opportunity, I guess you'd say. So I'm going to ask a few questions. So in addition to and I strongly support your use of a consultant to talk about where we need people, where we need stations, what close stations we should be leaving open or building, etc. Equipment in the right place. Now that we're building more high rises off Peninsula and whatnot, so that's going to be change our equipment needs, I would think. And the other thing, you started to touch on this a little bit more subsequently to your questions, but in addition to needing more equipment and more people and putting them in a better place, I'd like to see what you think the ICT upgrades will help. You used your example of 1 switch versus 7. Will that knock off a minute? Will it knock off 2 minutes? What impact will that have on, will it all have to be equipment? Will it all have to be more people if we could dispatch faster? So just a little bit more understanding about the ICT, opportunities, if you will. The draft that you showed, and I hope council and media and folks watching this understood this, because while we have a serious situation for fire situations where we're not getting the 14 there quickly enough, I wanted to make sure that the people understand that's an active fire situation. So what I don't want the message to be today is if I call today and because a fire alarm is going off or because there's a campfire in a backyard or something, those folks often, 1 truck or 4 arrives, and usually in Bedford-Sackville and other places, they are meeting their timeline. It's, I believe, I think, Chief, and you clarify this when I'm through, is that it's when you actually have an active fire situation and you need more units there, the 14 people there, that's really when we're getting in trouble. I don't want people to think that if they call 911 tonight because of a campfire or because the frying pan's on fire, that's going to take 11 to 14 minutes or something. So just a little clarification on that. And I bring this up every year, first of all, and thank you for your kind words about, I am so proud of the volunteers at Station 8 here in Bedford, and I think they are exemplary how they work with the career fighters, and I've been to joint events with them and things, and they're just fabulous, and I've seen examples of the same at 9 and 10. But every year I mention this, and largely more before your time, Chief, with Bill and Doug were here. We've got $3,000 a year volunteers right now. We've got career firefighters that are making, let's say, almost $100,000 a year right now. In areas where we are finding it difficult to get volunteers, I think it's high time we started looking at, somebody else mentioned part-time, or maybe the term auxiliary or something that comes in, and I don't know how the union would do this, but somebody who cannot commit perhaps to being a career fighter and the cost of that, but could, for a little bit more money than the $3,000 a year, for people who aren't just doing this as community service, some kind of compromise there, particularly in our rural areas, that say, okay, well, maybe it's 20 or 30 or 40 or $50,000 a year, but we really need you when the volunteers are downtown at work or when they're away on the weekends. There must be some other sort of hybrid that we can come up with in the rural areas that has something between the $3,000 cost and $100,000 cost, and help you service those areas. So there's my thoughts, but thank you very much, and I look forward to the results of the consultant and what we're going to do out here in 9 and 10. But thank you for the presentation and for giving us a good little wake-up call today. An alarm. So there you go.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. I think I have 3 questions, and I'll try to tackle those and let me know if I missed anything. So your first question on the ICT technology, although the projects will be somewhat slowed down in the capital budget that we're talking about, the kind of primary ICT projects that are critical to get people to the call quicker there's a couple of them, and the one's more complicated than the other. The first one is station alerting. So that was the analogy I was using with the light switches. So there is technology that can expedite how quickly information goes from the computer-aided dispatch, which is the computer that figures out who should go to what call, and get that information into the station. And once the information, so it streamlines that process, and it's much, much quicker. The other thing that technology can do is prepare the station to get crews out quicker. It can do many, many things. It can turn the TVs in the station on to give the dispatch information, so you don't have to go to one location to see it. It can turn the lights on the path to the apparatus floor. It can open doors so that you don't lose a couple. Like, we've got all this, we've done lots of analysis in the new station design to design a station that gets you from wherever you are to this in the station to the trucks in the shortest amount of time. We have all kinds of buildings that we currently have crews in that were never designed like that. So, you know, you are in Fall River, for example, before we put a pole in that station, crews were running down a staircase that led away from the fire trucks from the second floor. Like, that just doesn't make any sense, right? So the station alerting software would shave upwards of 20, 30 seconds possibly off a call. That might be, you know, kind of really optimistic, but certainly when you're measuring response times in seconds, 20, 30 seconds out of 90 is a big chunk of time. And I can tell you that's probably one of the most frustrating things firefighters feel is when they know there's a call and they don't know where they're going. You know, they hear the switches turn on in the station, they know they're going somewhere, but they don't even know where they're going. They don't know where to be prepared to turn left or right when they go out the door. So certainly that technology piece is important. The other major technology piece, which is a lot more complicated and needs collaboration with police and IES, the dispatch center, is switching to dispatch by apparatus. We call it intelligent dispatching. It's dispatching a piece of apparatus instead of a station. So we have stations with all types of vehicles inside it with different equipment on the truck, different attributes of the vehicle. Is it a pump? Is it a tanker? Is it an aerial? Different crew configurations. Does the crew have hazmat training? Do they have tech rescue training? And the concept is you program the attributes of the vehicle, what type of vehicle it is and what type of calls it should go to, and the attributes of the personnel on the vehicle, which is tied into our rostering project that we're doing as well. And you join those two together, and that makes a deployable resource. And you dispatch by vehicle instead of by station. And that might sound like, why can't you do that? It is very, very difficult. And the other change to that is it sees the vehicle drive around in the community. So as we are out in the community doing first two lines of defense, doing fire service inspections, you might be over at the far side of your response area, and the call comes into the other side of your response area, but because we're dispatching by station, it doesn't see that you're over here and that they should be sending another truck to that resource. So that is much more complicated and is farther out in our roadmap, but it is absolutely an industry best practice. To answer your question on the emergency response time targets, those blue dots, red dots are only for confirmed structure fires. So that is what Council's emergency response time target is for. If you are going to an open burn complaint, obviously we're not screaming all those trucks down the road to open burn complaint. And for a medical call, the emergency response time target only accounts for the first in truck, and typically we're only sending one truck to a medical call. I also maybe failed to mention part of the reason for what we believe, and we're still digging into this data because it just kind of ended at the end of December. Part of the reason we feel maybe our performance has dropped on the first in apparatus arriving at the call is because our medical calls are down, we're out and about less. And because we were doing less fire service inspections and our crews were locked down in the station not to get COVID, we were out and about less than we were before, which means we're not mobile, which is our fastest response time. So when you're driving around in a truck and you're on the radio and a call comes in and dispatch says, pump 3, please respond to, a report of a fire at this location, your turnout time is literally 0 seconds because you're out of the station. We had hardly any of those this year because we were locked down in the station. People couldn't come visit us. So that's certainly affected our times as well. So the next thing that you asked me about was the difference in kind of what we compensate the volunteers for versus our career. So I would say, first of all, this probably is a conversation that needs to happen in camera. We are in the midst of contract negotiations, and we obviously have got to respect that with our firefighters, with our union for our firefighters. But it also is, challenged by fair pay for fair work, same pay for same work. So we can have more conversations offline if you would like, or in camera as we get our mandate for negotiations, but certainly we're obligated to have those conversations with the union.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. It is just a couple of minutes before 12 o'clock, so we should take a break at this point and come back for 1 p.m. So if the clerk is prepared, then I would like to recess until 1 p.m.
And just as a reminder, please leave this meeting and go to the afternoon meeting invitation in your calendars.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, and we will see everybody at 1 p.m.
Thank you.